welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Hawaiian Electric's Resilient and Renewable Energy Community Workshop. Mahalo to the Wailua Moku for hosting us here at the Wailua Elementary School. Thank you for those joining us in person, those who are joining us on Zoom, and those who will be watching us live on Olelo. Just really appreciate your time and as part of this important conversation. Just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I'm Kurt Sue. I'm the Director of Community Affairs at Hawaiian Electric. To my right, your left, our facilitator for tonight's meeting will be Alani Apio of Kamau LLC. To my side here is Hawaiian Electric's Director of Transmission, Distribution, and Interconnection Planning, Ken Aramaki. Also on your left, my right, is Mark Asano, who's Hawaiian Electric's Director for Integrated Grid Planning. Joining us from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory is Katie Wachter, who is a Geospatial Science Researcher 3. And joining us later for the Q&A portion of our meeting is Colton Ching, who is our Senior Vice President of Planning and Technology at Hawaiian Electric. Also wanted to give a shout out and a big mahalo to the Center for Resilient Neighborhoods, who is joining us here tonight. They are doing active community engagement work to identify areas for resilience hubs in the communities across the island of Oahu. And also a big thanks to our partners at Olelo for helping to make this hybrid meeting possible. We're trying something different. We've all gone through the pandemic and had virtual meetings and want to get back to in-person, but we're also trying to make these meetings more accessible. So we're, for the first time, trying to live broadcast these meetings in addition to offering them in person and also via Zoom. So thank you all again for joining us. For those who are joining us online, you're not missing anything for the open house portion. We had a half-hour open house where people could come and join us and talk story with some of our subject matter experts. The same information that was shared in the open house will be shared as part of tonight's presentation. So same information, and for those who joined us, we did have some light refreshments and food for everybody. At Hawaiian Electric, the community counts on us to keep the lights on, and it's also our responsibility to work to stabilize energy costs by transitioning off of fossil fuel. That's part of the reason why we're here tonight, is talking about working with the community as we plan to transition to renewable energy. We understand there are many concerns about energy costs, and we're happy to have follow-up discussions on that topic. The primary focus for tonight's workshop is the importance of us focusing on the decarbonization of our energy system and making it resilient, more resilient in light of climate change. For those of us who have seen Puerto Rico and Florida are recent examples of why we need to start planning now in the event for potential disasters. And really, that's the first portion of tonight's meeting. We're hoping to introduce two separate but related planning concepts, and we are in need of the community's insight and expertise. We want to start the conversation early and involve you throughout our planning process. The first portion of our discussion will be talking about opportunities for microgrids. So microgrids, they can service critical facilities connected to the electric grid, but they also can be islanded or sectioned off to continue providing electricity through local energy resources. So how can something like a microgrid benefit the North Shore or Wailua Moku? It really comes down to accessibility to your community and the vulnerability, living coastal, not having access to the same critical resources as the more dense portions of the island, really looking at if transportation were cut off or the grid was down, the broader grid, how could we potentially work with the community to plan for powering critical facilities, whether it's gathering places, medical facilities, places that have refrigeration that can keep food or medications cold, and also providing power to emergency first responder agencies. we can start the planning now to identify those areas that would have, again, it can be isolated. So if the rest of the grid is down and North Shore becomes inaccessible, then it can have access to potential emergency power to keep those critical facilities online until the rest of the grid can be brought back. So it's really an element of disaster preparedness, but it's a way of us, Hawaiian Electric, working with community to better plan how we can make our energy grid more resilient. So that's going to be a big focus we'll be covering here tonight. And we also want to hear from you in terms of should something like this, a microgrid, be considered for the North Shore community? And if so, what types of facilities should be included as part of that planning? The second portion of tonight's meeting, if we can, thank you, Ken. We'll focus on the broader, at the macro level, energy planning for the island of Oahu. We have very ambitious decarbonization goals, and so we want to hear from the community about how we should plan for our energy systems so that we can bring on more renewable generation sources, again, getting off of fossil fuels to meet our island's energy needs and demands while also achieving our decarbonization and resilience goals. Both of these important planning initiatives require a lot of planning and will involve procurement and eventually development. So we're very early in this planning process. But most of all, in order to make this planning successful, it's going to require community input upfront and throughout the process. And we're committed to having those conversations with the community going forward. These are definitely not easy concepts and questions that are being raised, but as you all know, this is very important for how we plan our energy system with respect to disaster preparedness and again, trying to achieve our decarbonization goals. It's really part of what we're trying to do as part of these workshops and going forward is to make it easier for communities to access the same planning information that our engineers are looking at and making that more accessible to communities to have important conversations and to participate in this dialogue going forward. And we also need to balance that as we have, next slide, please, Ken. We've learned over time that we can come up with good technical solutions, but they may not always be what's best for the community. And so again, the importance of underscoring why it's so important to have conversations early, to plan properly in order to balance the technical analysis that our engineers are performing, by at the same time asking ourselves and asking our communities, how do these changes and these transitions that we're making with respect to the energy grid and energy generation impact communities going forward? And there's a real big challenge in front of us in terms of reaching the goals that we have as a state to achieve the goals that are in place by balancing these two very important elements. And so that's, again, at the foundation of what we're trying to do is share with you the technical planning and the analyses that are being done, and then asking for community input and insight upfront to help us shape the planning process going forward. If it's one thing that we've learned over the course of talking to you as the community and across the island is that the only way we're going to achieve these ambitious goals is by working together. And so I just want to really extend my appreciation to all of you for joining us. And for those who are not able to, this information, this recording will be posted online for viewing later. And all of what you share with us tonight and even after tonight's meeting, it's going to be documented. So as I mentioned, we're trying to make it easier to participate in the process. Whatever you email us with or send us online, we're going to compile a report and share it back with you and then continue to have conversations going forward. So again, appreciate all of you joining us for this. Again, we've learned a lot through engaging and listening and learning from communities. Very important in the work that we're doing for renewable energy planning. We've got, in working with leaders on the west portion of island, West Oahu, they've shared a lot of input because they are carrying the energy burden for a lot of the island with respect to solar farms and power plants are on that side. And so they have been very actively engaging with us to help us shape our procurement, our energy procurement. And it led to some really significant improvements in our development processes. And so by doing that, they all came together, they aligned their interests, and they filed what they want to see in renewable energy development with the Public Utilities Commission. And most of what they had asked for has been implemented, not only for the RFP or request for proposal that was open at the time, but all requests for proposals going forward. So it was really significant improvements that were made, and it was the result of communities coming together. And that's, again, the importance of all of you joining us here tonight. But again, thank you for being a part of this process. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ken to explain a little bit more about what microgrids are and this process we're undertaking.
Thanks, Kurt. Okay, aloha. I'm Ken Aramaki. I'm the Director of Transmission, Distribution, and Interconnection Planning at Hawaiian Electric. And in this first part, myself and Katie will talk about microgrids and this project that we're working on to map potential microgrids. So when we get into microgrids are really, it's key to put microgrids where it makes sense to put microgrids, and microgrids are support resilience. So what's on this slide here are community lifelines. And so each of these sectors or community lifelines, if they're disrupted at any time, they disrupt many things. They disrupt basically how we live. And they're all interdependent on each other, but at the center of it is energy. So microgrids, when we look at microgrids, these are we have to always look for opportunities to improve energy resilience as we make our plans. So a little microgrid 101, or electricity 101 and microgrid 101. So the electricity grid was built many, many years ago, and it was originally built with, starting with bulk generation. So from the left, there's large generators. They are transmitted at high voltages and step down through substations and ultimately gets to our customers at lower voltages. Over the past decades, we've had a large number of new generators added at various areas of our system. So wind plants, PV farms, and now energy storage is becoming a big part of that. These are all interconnected at various points on our system at various voltages. In addition to that, customers have been able to, through our programs, been able to add their own resources such as PV, batteries, even generators. And much of it was to offset the electricity costs or energy costs for themselves. And in recent years, a lot of the technology can now become microgrids. So there's folks now with PV and battery at their house that can go, that has the ability to keep their house running while there's a grid outage without them even really knowing that there's a grid outage. And that's essentially a small version of a microgrid. Microgrids can vary in scale. They can be very small with one house. It can also be multiple customers and even businesses. So we have a program in place that allows the development of microgrids, of kind of the larger scale microgrids, what we call hybrid microgrids. And when we developed this program, we knew that there was going to be an initial barrier for customers where they wouldn't necessarily know where a good area to site one of these microgrids is. So around that time, we applied for a grant. It's called like a program. Yeah, a federal program. And through this federal program, we were able to work with various national labs. And on this particular project, we have the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, and that's where Katie's from. Also on our team, we have Sandia National Labs and Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. So we have these very smart people that we can draw on for this project. And with this project, what we essentially want to do is find areas on the island of Oahu that may be well suited for microgrid siting. And so Katie will talk about what considerations are in play for the mapping.
Cool, thanks Ken. And thanks everybody for coming out tonight. It's awesome to see so many folks engaged in energy in their community. And I would like to give a shout out to my collaborators, Dr. Matt Lave and Thad Haynes from Sandia National Laboratories. They're the engineers that have done, some of the, grid flow or power flow analysis. And I am a geographer, so complicated grid questions go to Ken and Mark. Okay, so for looking at these hybrid microgrids, we so far have come up with 3 categories of data or criteria that we're looking at. So those include criticality. So this is kind of the obvious aspect, right? Like where are the critical loads, facilities, and services? So this includes emergency or places you would go in emergency, such as emergency shelters, first responders like fire stations, police stations, as well as emergency operation centers. As well, we've included medical facilities. So these are hospitals, outpatient facilities, surgical centers, and skilled care facilities. So that includes nursing homes, basically anywhere where life and limb could be compromised if there was a significant outage. As well as critical infrastructure. So this includes water sources, treatment plants, internet exchange points, transmission and communications towers, and bridges, ports, airports, dams, anywhere where if there was an outage, bad things would happen. So the second criterion that we've been looking at is vulnerability, looking at what parts of the grid currently and are projected to endure the longest or most frequent outages. And for this, we included natural hazards as well as inaccessibility. So things like special flood hazard areas, which includes 1% flood areas or 100-year flood areas, as well as sea level rise. And that is with the low emission scenario through 2050. Landslide risk, fire risk, and tsunami evacuation zones, as well as remoteness, which describes generally like how dependent a given area is on fewer lifelines in terms of transmission as well as transportation. And then finally, in the vulnerability criterion, we've got outages. So that is a 10-year range looking at duration and frequency of outages. And then our final criterion that we've looked at so far is societal impact. So looking at what locations would significantly impact communities if they lost power. So this criterion is probably our least well-defined. And so far it includes residential care facilities, community homes, customers within existing assistance programs, as well as schools, daycares, libraries, and disadvantaged communities. And the definition we're using for disadvantaged communities follows the Department of Energy's definition, which mirrors the Biden administration's Justice 40 definition, which includes 36 different metrics of burden. Okay, so with this exercise, we're looking for the overlap of all these different criteria, being most, opportune for these hybrid microgrid development. So to sum up, the criticality encompasses services that directly impact life and limb, particularly during emergency. And the vulnerability criterion incorporates natural hazards, remoteness, and overall grid reliability and grid readiness to receive a hybrid microgrid. And the societal impact criterion represents customers disproportionately affected by outages. So this is mostly to ensure that there is equity and accessibility in consideration of these hybrid microgrid opportunities. Thanks. So this mapping exercise has covered all of Oahu. We've incorporated dozens of spatial data sets representing all the different criteria so far, and we've built a model showing where customer energy resources that are grid connected and electricity demand are balanced to find easy opportunities to consider developing hybrid microgrids. And that's what you see in this map. But what it has said to us so far within this project is that the map is incomplete. It focuses on infrastructure and not people. And it's more important to consider the people that live here and how they're affected by these service disruptions.
Can you read the top left tab and color coding for us?
Maybe. So it's a label showing the different color combinations with the different criteria. So pink is the criticality, and I'm going to call that periwinkle, it's vulnerability, or blue. And then the bottom one is societal impact. That's a good question. It is very hard to read. Oh, good. Okay, so this is where you all come in. We've included a lot of data in this analysis, but we want to hear from you specifically about questions related to, are there criteria that are missing for your community? What places should be included in these hybrid microgrids, and how should they be prioritized? So we've prepared this map to kind of facilitate those discussions, to show where these different criteria are distributed across this MOCU, and hopefully for everybody to see and understand, what data is out there. So this map is available if you want to log into or hop on to web browser and look up hawaiipowered.com/ETIP. That's ETIPP. The link is also conveniently written on the handouts that we're going around. Yes. Agnes, I think you have it. Yes, perfect. And Brandy was just holding it up. Thank you, Brandy. So on hawaiipowered.com/ETIP, there are copies of these maps as well as, a feedback form that we would love for you all viewing online or in person to fill out. Also, the in-person paper feedback form is great too. We appreciate it. So at the end of this first ETIP project, we will share these community level maps for hybrid microgrid opportunities like this one in Hauula. And the idea is to show where these criteria, impacts, and community resources meet. So I encourage you to visit hawaiipowered.com/ETIP and check out the MOCU map and the different criteria and share with us there. So now I think I'd like to turn it over to Kurt and Alani for
The next one, please, Ken. So thank you, Katie and Ken. This is the part where it's open dialogue, questions. Please feel free to raise anything. We have multiple audience members joining us in person, via Zoom, and watching on Olelo. Again, we are trying something different, so just so that we can all contribute questions, comments, if you have a mobile device or if you're at home at a computer, we're going to be using this program called Menti. And so whatever you enter via your mobile device or computer is going to pop up on the screen for everybody watching to see. You can also, for those here, can physically ask your questions, of course, on the mic in person. For those joining via Zoom, you can hand raise and ask your questions verbally. But this is just another vehicle if you'd like to add comments for all to see or questions. And we're going to try to be monitoring all those different channels. So just by joining, you can go either, for those familiar with the QR code, you can use your mobile device and use your your camera to access and go straight to the Menti website, or you could just log into on your browser www.menti.com, and it's going to ask you for a code, which is 48869001. And again, this is just to make all of the comments visible and questions for those who are joining in whatever format you're watching us in. But with that, again, we just wanted to mention that we're going to try and get to anybody who has questions with the help of Alani, and then so feel free to those in person and those who are again online and other formats to raise questions that will help you provide comments that or if you'd like to learn more about any of what was shared. And lastly, we don't expect to solve all of these issues tonight. It's really to just introduce this information to you so that you can look at them and think about it and look at the maps and the data a little more carefully at your own time. But again, we will be accepting those comments even after the meeting and questions as they come in. But with that, turn it over to Alani.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. We got this one? Hot? Okay, cool. Good evening, everybody. Thanks again for coming out. So the way that we're going to work these two sessions, excuse me, both after this one and after the next presentation is we're here to capture your comments as well as, to the best that we can, answer any questions. And so for those who are online or or watching on Olelo, we're going to lean towards the audience here first because they're here and in front of us. But Hawaiian Electric staff will flag me at times when there are multiples of the same question that are coming in, through online or through Olelo, because obviously if many people have the same question, then that's something that probably needs to be addressed. So without any further ado, we've got about a half an hour to discuss. And I think you had some questions, sir. Sure. Okay. If you can identify yourself just by your name.
Why not? So right now you can go off grid. There's people who have batteries and panels, and because they were wealthy, they just did it. That's their business, I guess.
Correct.
Okay, so to the extent that someone wants to get involved with multiple hookups through your lines that's coming in now, and has panels and wants to do battery backup, there's a lot of money involved in something like that. You can, if you're wealthy, maybe that's not a problem, but if you have to borrow the money. So when we got panels on the houses to begin with, HECO came up with formulas like, well, maybe we'll buy some, maybe we won't. It kind of bounced around. So from HECO's point of view, is the goal for you guys, you have to collect enough money for your overhead, which is choke plenty, but the consumer doesn't want to have to pay any more than they need to either. So what's your formula for trying to make everybody happy?
So there's two parts to that question. I'm going to say it back to you to see if I got it right. So what we're talking about here is the creation of microgrids that are basically disaster preparedness programs, situations. I don't know the right word, but it's like, can we power up the fire station, the main grocery store, the school, and the main hospital? So that's the part that they just discussed. That's not what I think you're talking about. I think what you were asking about is on an individual residential level, what are the opportunities available vis-a-vis Hawaiian Electric? Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay, let me send that back to Hawaiian Electric. Who wants to take that one then?
Okay, I can take a shot at it. So in that diagram that I had before, there's different scales of microgrids, right? So if we're talking about a microgrid at a home level, so what you're talking about, a residential home with maybe PV panels plus a battery, we have programs in place that compensate the customer for export during uncertain circuits for times that or we pay for export of the during daytime, and then they have the ability to also have backup power with their batteries. And we also have a great program right now that's called Battery Bonus that also provides extra compensation to the customer for adding batteries. So that's one component. That's a single customer microgrid. With this mapping, what we're doing is we're looking at areas that could be suitable to have multiple customers using various resources to create a microgrid. And as it's currently done with this program, this is a customer program. So that type of microgrid would be set up or paid for by the customer. And customer could be, could be individual customers. It could be also multiple customers pulling together to create this extra added resilience for their area. Could be also other agencies that are interested in having that additional resilience.
Bob, did that get to your answering your question?
Yeah, when you use the word customers, if it's a fire department or a hospital or something like that, it's back to the taxpayers. Those are the customers. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to go now to Kathleen.
Thank you. Thanks, Alani. Thank you, guys. For some of you who don't know, I work for the Board of Water Supply. So one of the things I have a question about, because you're asking about locations, have you talked to, like, our agency? Have you talked to DOE? Because trying to find a place on the North Shore that people are going to feel comfortable with, because, again, what do these things look like? Somebody put up their visual impact spot on. What do these things look like? So if you can co-locate with existing people like us that would absolutely want to be on that grid because we have to pump water from our reservoirs. Have you talked to us, if they're not so big, we have 3 reservoirs up in Pupukea where Bob lives. Maybe there's enough space up there. So those are things I'm wondering, are you guys looking, are you reaching out? If you need, I'll set up a meeting with Ernie. Not a problem, but I think looking at those areas, especially those areas where that's for disaster prep, which we totally support. The other issue is pretty much everything you see is tsunami. We're sitting in a tsunami zone right here. So this school would not. The only school that's not in the tsunami is our high school. So those are, everything for us is going to have to be up the hill. So those are the other things you have to look at. Hospital, got Kahuku, obviously got Wahiwa. So, but I'm thinking you need to be reaching out to those. If you haven't already, I would strongly suggest that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. So there's 3 comments. I just want to go back so I got it, and then we can answer. One is, have you folks been talking to Board of Water Supply? That's number 1. Number 2 is, what does it actually look like? Is there a good visual of what a microgrid would look like? And so we actually don't have it yet, but that's a great question. And then the third was, the comment is, for your folks, Moku, so much of it lies in the tsunami zone that it is very important that you guys, everybody consider going Mauka and placing Mauka. Was that fair? Okay, so if you guys want to take on the question of talking to BWS and other important entities.
Yeah, that's a good question. We do have a resilience working group, and Board of Water Supply is a part of that, as well as like HIEMA and a lot of other state agencies.
And what is HIEMA?
HIEMA is the State Emergency Management Agency.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've been working with them. We also have a stakeholder council as part of our long-term planning process, and BWS is represented there as well. So we are coordinating with them.
Okay, follow up, and then I'm going to go over the gentleman had a question over there.
Okay. I would strongly suggest then you get those entities all together and bring them out to the community, because you're asking us for our input, but you may already be solving some of these problems with, I'm assuming Barry's on your group. You may already be solving it, so I don't really, to be honest with you, I don't want to be wasting my time giving you guys input if you got a better mousetrap. That's all, so I really think you need to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious as far as, is this going to be allowed on ag land?
Okay, thank you.
Because of the fact that, most of the land around here is all ag. Even above, even if you were to put it above the pumping station or the water tank that's on Cam Highway, which would help. But, it's all ag. So is it allowed to put your infrastructure on ag?
So who wants to take that question?
I'll take the first.
Sure.
Test. So no to Zone 1 ag land, but if Zone 2 there's a possibility. But going back to Kathleen's question about what does a microgrid look like, it really is hardening the existing grid that's here. So when we talk about microgrids, it's not really going to be something that's overly visible. What it might look like is replacement of either the wooden pole with steel poles, making it stronger to withstand an emergency, and making sure that there's an interconnection point to power it with some type of generation. Whether it's a renewable energy project, whether it's a generator, like a mobile generator, something that can hook up where, like we mentioned, that you can isolate the North Shore, a section of the North Shore grid and provide it with emergency power. That's visibly what the microgrid essentially would look like. It's hardening the existing system with components to isolate it. The switch, so we would be things that switching units that can sectionalize the grid to disconnect it from the rest of the island grid that's going to be offline in the event of an emergency, so that North Shore could potentially have power in an emergency. But the physical part goes into another discussion of microgrids, which is what types of opportunities would the community like to see in terms of how those microgrids are powered? That's something that we haven't designed yet. So there's no project in the queue. There's nothing to that effect at this stage. It's really just conceptual.
So did that get at your follow-up? Okay.
On your thing that you showed, you have, I guess, a storage energy. Is that what you're considering as your microgrid? I mean, because of the fact that, if you're going to storage energy, you got to store it somewhere. And that was my question, because of the fact that if you're going to storage anywhere, the biggest land areas are probably going to be ag.
Good point. And you're right that it goes back to the generation source that we talked about. So that hasn't been identified yet. But to your point, if the community says we would like solar to be to power the microgrid, then you're right that it probably would also be a good idea to include a battery as part of that. But that's another component of where was an appropriate place for that emergency power to come from, right? Where should it be sited? And that's something that we're interested in hearing from the community. Where are there opportunities for this specific purpose of a microgrid?
So thank you, Kurt. Did you have something to add, Ken?
Yeah, just a little clarification. So, this mapping is really for a customer program that was developed. So, I know we're talking a lot about like where is certain things going to go, what is it going to look like. This is something for a customer to identify for themselves, or a group of customers to identify for themselves, whether a microgrid makes sense for that area based on these various factors. Along with this data, though, we can also look at citing microgrids. But I just want to get back to the point that this is the genesis of creating this map, was to enable customers to see where these opportunities are.
So just to be clear, and I'll come back to you in a minute. I believe what you're saying, Ken, is that the maps that you folks are showing show basically the infrastructure, but they weren't initially built to consider where microgrids should go. Is that? Well, let me rephrase that. The hybrid microgrids that we're asking feedback from the communities about.
Okay, let me take a swing. It's a really good question, Reed. But I think what we want to make very clear for all of us tonight is the work that Katie and others have done are really to identify opportunities for customer microgrids. There's a number of reasons for pursuing a microgrid. And a lot of it is us, right? We are looking at putting microgrids on different parts of the islands that we've served. We're looking on the north side of the Big Island. We're using the generators that we built at Schofield Barracks as a microgrid for Schofield and the Wahiawa area as one example. So that's a big example. But we recognize that microgrids can be used for reasons other than what we want to do from the grid side to serve our customers more resiliently. There might be a need or a desire by our customers or a group of customers working together, perhaps working with a third party to develop a microgrid that may not rise to the surface from our perspective that one should be built, but from a community or customer perspective, you may feel that it's very important to build one here. And so we just want to facilitate that process by providing this, creating these maps, providing this information. But to create those opportunities, the thing that's really missing, as Katie points out, is your folks' perspective, right? So it's a great question about, or comment on siting on ag lands, you know, what about batteries? I know there's a lot of concern about the safety associated with batteries. Great questions. These are the kinds of things that I think are ripe for discussion if a community is looking to develop a community microgrid. But for us at Hawaiian Electric, we're not, because it's a community microgrid, we're not going to be the ones saying you should use a battery or you should use a PV system or you should use a diesel generator. That's really for communities who have interest in developing one to make the decision, and where they're located, of course, goes with that as well, right, for communities to drive. Sorry for the long response, but I just wanted to bring it back to the original kind of presentation that Ken and Katie gave.
Just to be clear, though, there's the differentiation between a microgrid and a hybrid microgrid that you folks are trying to develop and get the information from the community on, that would be actually funded by other entities rather than the community, and is based on a desire for disaster preparedness and hardening the grid. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, it is, but let me just expand on that. So Bob gave an example of someone who has a PV and a battery and can run their home or small business off-grid, right? Or if the lights are out, they can still keep the lights on. That's one example. They fund it themselves, right? They make the decision. We, as a utility, we're looking at places where creating a microgrid, we believe, is the right thing to do to improve the resilience. There's a lot of different ways to improve resilience. Microgrid is one of them. And especially in places where we have customers that are quite remote, far away from the rest of the electric system, microgrids may be a very viable alternative to doing something like, you know, adding another distribution line, right, another circuit to serve the area, or to harden the line running into that community. So those are things that we would look at, that we would do, that we would sort of do a test to see, is it cost effective to do a microgrid versus other alternatives, and it's something that the utility would do, just like how we do other utility projects. But a customer microgrid, especially a hybrid microgrid, that is using part of the utility, Hawaiian Electric's wires, to connect various loads together to work in a microgrid, that's something we want to give customers an option to do. And as Alani points out, to clarify, that's something then that set of customers or a developer who's trying to do a hybrid microgrid to fund, right? And there's a tariff in place to help with that. But ultimately, it's a decision and set of actions driven by customers.
Phew, thank you. We have somebody online, and I believe it's Amy. We're going to go and take her question and then come back around to you folks.
Yeah, mahalo for creating this space and an opportunity for me to engage from home because I'm with my kids. But I had a couple, so first a clarifying question. These hybrid microgrids, you keep using the term customers, and at the same time referring to a public function of these microgrids, which is disaster preparedness. So are we thinking that these are going to be publicly funded, like through federal funds or state funds? Or are we thinking that communities have to like pool their resources to provide themselves this kind of hybrid grid, microgrid? That's my first question. I don't know if you want to answer that, and then I have a follow-up question.
Okay,
or a different
thank you,
question.
thank you, Amy. I'm gonna, because it has been confusing for me. We've been using the term community. Actually, I'm gonna turn it over to Kurt. You wanna take that one on and separate those two?
So for the definition, I think that Amy is asking about, it's and it's probably more. I think it's both, right, Ken? I mean, there's options for customers to if they're on their own, if they and customer can be not only residential but all of the above what we talked about earlier. But on a larger scale, there's opportunities for funding to come from like things like the rate base or putting out for like what's known as a request for proposal for somebody to construct the microgrid at the lowest cost, a competitive bidding process essentially. So there's two different essentially ways that a microgrid could be paid for. It can be what's mentioned, customer driven, or on a larger scale, it can be something that we can collaborate with the community on together that wouldn't be paid for solely by the customers or the community, if that makes sense. It's separate.
So just to clarify, Amy, the reason we're here tonight and the reason that we're doing these public forums is to talk about the one where it's essentially going to be public or government funded. So these are hybrid microgrids that are going to be used for disaster preparedness scenarios to help during disasters that would be basically somehow, some way, in different forms, publicly funded rather than privately. Now, the gentleman here asked a unique question that we haven't had until tonight, which is, well, what about the opportunities for private funding of microgrids? And to that question, Colton is saying, yes, and we need that as well. So if there are places where different community members, different businesses want to hui their resources, right? They can also tap into opportunities to create microgrids that will harden and protect their area. But specifically, what we're doing tonight and going forward is looking for those areas to place microgrids in your folks' community, Waialua, this moku, that will help your entire community in times of disaster, not just one specific set of customers. Does that make sense, Amy? Yeah, good. You want to go on to your second question?
I am experiencing a lot of, maybe now you can hear me. So that's great. That helps me better understand. And then my second question is, I know that you're working with HIEMA on your resiliency group, but across the state, there are, at least on Oahu, actually on the neighbor islands as well, there are community groups called Hawaii Hazard Awareness and Resilience Program. And so these are groups of community members who have spent months. We spent 1.5 years in Wahiawa identifying areas of strength and weakness and developing a plan. So I would strongly suggest taking a look at those plans, because that will give you really detailed analysis of what the community members think are good, important structures to be protected and hubs where we can harden. So I'm wondering if you've had conversations about HARP, or that's on your radar.
No, thank you for that, Amy. And that's really going to help us going forward. We may not have that immediately visible. To your point, we are working with Hawaii Emergency Management Agency and other state and city agencies, but that level of specificity you mentioned that's being done at the community level, we would love to have, through you or other community members, access those reports and summaries that can feed into this planning. As Kathleen mentioned, we're not wanting to waste community members' time. The analysis that Katie and NREL and that team did, there's already identified criteria and facilities to Department of Homeland Security that's already on the map. So we're not looking at creating a redundant effort. It's really at the community grassroots level. What are there churches? Are there facilities? Are there other things that should be included that we're missing? And that's what we're trying to gather from an ask of community is on top of what is already documented, to your point, what should we also include and to capture that as part of the planning?
Thank you.
Katie, do you want to make a comment? Yes or no?
Super brief.
Okay.
Just, okay, testing, 1, 2.
You're good.
There we go, sorry, thanks. I just want to tack on to what Kurt was saying, that we need to know the places that aren't in the official data sets. And that's really the visibility we don't have that you all do.
Thank you very much, Katie. So we've got about 10 minutes left for this part of the discussion. And I know that it's going to seem frustratingly short, but this is only the first of discussions to come. So this is just getting the initial information out to you. There's a gentleman who had a question in the back.
Sorry, maybe not a question, but a comment. So one, fully supportive of microgrids in the community. So comment on facilities would be an analysis on areas that maybe have existing asphalt or asphalt that is in need of repair that the community would benefit from. So infrastructure maintenance is a huge issue on the North Shore. So if there were opportunities to coincide siting of, whatever sort of materials are, would comprise a microgrid to improve, and reinforce existing infrastructure, that certainly would be well received by the community, especially if, there are community plans with regards to using the sugar mill or shopping centers. And frankly, looking at the geographer here at the front of the room, looking at historic land uses, right? There's probably lots of parts of ag land with small parcels that were, like a disposal pit or had asphalt or an old structure that would not be suitable for, I'm talking small pieces, right? But if you got small pieces of equipment and people are worried about, disrupting ag or viewing, you can take advantage, right? Infill, basically. But ag areas have infill as well. You just have to identify them as a geographer. That's pretty much your specialty. So those are the sort of things that would be very helpful.
Thank you very much. Those are great comments. Infill on ag land for potential microgrids. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Or we have somebody online? I'm checking with the audience. I'll take that in a minute.
Thanks, Alani. Just a few points. We are currently updating our North Shore Sustainable Communities Plan, and North Shore has, on this island, the highest amount of renewables, and that's including what's out in Kahuku, so just FYI. I'll tell you right now, we are not fans of wind turbines, and don't even talk about offshore wind. Just warning you. Microgrid, the term is kind of confusing. I think I now understand what you guys are getting at. You're kind of looking at a bunch of different things, actually, and that's great, but when I think microgrid, I think of a self-contained power unit, that maybe is bigger than a generator, but not as big as what we got over in Schofield. And then on grants and things like that, if you want customers to hooey up, obviously it would be helpful if you had people connect them with grant programs and things like that. And maybe your stakeholders group, your resiliency group could be help with that, identify those sources so we're not trying to scramble to find it ourselves, that you have allowed, that you say, oh no, here you go, this is where you go to. And I think definitions are important. You guys are using a lot of words here that, and I know this is close to Bob's heart, that we don't understand because we're lay people. And so definitions are really important. So even if you did a sheet of definitions for us, now that you've explained microgrid, and we're all kind of going, oh, now we get it. So very helpful. Thank you.
Kathleen, comments well taken. We've been struggling with it ourselves to make sure that we can get it to a layperson's, and we're still, obviously, it's a work in progress, but well noted. Kurt, did you want to respond to any of her?
Yes, and thank you for that too, Kathleen. As Alani mentioned, this is actually the first time we're trying to communicate microgrids publicly, and so your input is helping us tremendously to help us explain it, and so that people can provide input. It is very complex in structure, and as we're talking about here, there's different variations of it. There's different methods of identifying and funding it. So really, this is helpful, and that input about creating a reference sheet for communities to have, maybe we can post that on our website and hand those out. Absolutely super helpful feedback, and this is why we really appreciate the early input in helping us to refine as we go.
Thank you, Kurt. We have a question that came through the chat that Kanani is going to read out loud, and then we'll respond to.
So this question is from Raquel, and she just wants clarification if this is basically a resource to be able to support emergency management and support in the event of an emergency. And the comment is that we don't even have shelters in our moku, so I'd have to assume that it is an effective facility that would have to be up the hill towards Wahiawa.
Could you, since there was a car, motorcycle going by, can you restate it again, please, for everybody?
Question 2. So Raquel's question is, for clarification, is this basically a resource to be able to support emergency management or support in an event of an emergency?
The answer, I believe, is, well, Kurt, you wanna take that?
In short, yes, it's critical facilities, and critical can mean a bunch of different things. It's the facilities that we talked about in the presentation, but it's also critical defined by community as what's important for communities to have access to emergency power in the event of an emergency. And that's what these microgrids could potentially address, is how to, as Lonnie said, some might have self-sustaining facilities, rooftop and batteries, but as there's this option to have this isolated mini grid or microgrid essentially that can power critical facilities. So in short, the response was yes, that is what we're looking towards for emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness purposes. In the event of something like that happening, it's going to help make the grid more resilient by enhancing vulnerable parts of the island, if that makes it.
Thank you, Kurt. So the other part of her question was an acknowledgement that on the North Shore, and this is her, I don't know you guys, Moku, that there aren't any good, well-built disaster preparedness shelters. And her point is, shouldn't those be built first? And then obviously, if that's where the microgrid's gonna go, that would be something to come after. So her point was, there's other needs in this community, but there might be a way where, or a place, an area that despite the lack of shelters should still be covered. And so that's the kind of information that we're looking for. What time is it? What's our, just before 8. Okay, we're gonna take one last question and then we're gonna move on to the second one, the second part of the presentation.
So it's never a good idea to ask people what they think and have the cart before the horse. But we do have two eyes. Our brain is pretty visual. The schematic you had up there was pretty conceptual. And so I'm trying to visualize, is it, they aren't designed yet. It would be nice if they were cookie cutter. It would be nice to know, is a half acre appropriate for what? Or are we talking a footprint of 2 acres? I mean, there's no, the brain's looking for some kind of visual, and it would be nice if you could figure out how to incorporate that into your presentation. I realize this is early in the game, but my brain has a void.
Bob, you're absolutely right on that. You're spot on, and I'm a visual person too, so I need that as well. The team, we're taking that back and we're gonna work on it, see if we can provide that. So you're absolutely spot on, and our apologies for not being able to put something up that is very clear and accessible. So we're trying to develop those.
Can I add one element? So excellent point there, Bob, and I also wanted to speak to the previous comment as well. The work that was referenced in terms of the community's needs, that's actually something that our partners at the Center for Resilient Neighborhoods are working on. I know many of you may know Dari Kelly Paddock over in Hui Ohaula. there wasn't an existing facility there that served that purpose. So she went ahead and brought the community together, and now they are working towards building what's known as a resilience hub in the Ko'olauloa region. And so that's what the Serene Group is also working towards also, to identify opportunities for resilience hubs in other parts of the island. And so how that dovetails bigger picture with what we're talking about tonight is, if, like somebody mentioned, it should be Mauka. That's super important, and considerations that need to be built into planning for resilience hubs. And if there was a resilience hub constructed that's Mauka, or an existing facility that the community identifies, then that is something that we may not have visibility of early, and that could potentially be connected. It can be self-sustaining, it can have rooftop solar and battery, but potentially it could also be connected to a microgrid if there was one on the North Shore. So that's kind of how all the puzzle pieces fit together, but it is a very lengthy and complex process, and it is kind of cart before the horse in some instances, but a lot of this is happening in parallel because we need to start planning now, and I think that's the message that we're learning from our community partners and the diligence that they're doing, and how that fits into this broader energy response planning that we're doing.
Thank you, Kurt. We're going to be moving to the second part of the presentation. And just to reaffirm with you folks, this is not only our first shot at trying to present all this information, but it is the start of an ongoing conversation. So we're going to get better information to you as the days and months and years go on, and we're going to keep coming back and keep talking with you to see if we can build the right system as best as we can. I'm going to turn it over to Kurt.
So for the second portion of the meeting, as I mentioned earlier, it's like we were talking really at the micro level with microgrids at the community grassroots level. Now we're expanding the conversation more at the macro level. So we're talking about decarbonizing our energy system. To Kathleen's points, North Shore is carrying a heavy load with respect to renewable energy. And so we recognize that, and we wanted to figure out a better way to share or involve the community earlier in the planning process. We've heard that loud and clear. So what we'd like to share with you tonight is that early snapshot, the same information that our planners and our engineers are looking at. There was an analysis done for the island of Oahu to identify a solar and wind energy resource potential. That's not to say that this is all going to be developed, but it's really just to look at what's available. And Ken will speak more. Ken and Mark will speak more to this. Actually, Mark's going to be presenting this next portion. But it was an analysis that was done that factored in the opportunities, where it's not like somebody mentioned, it's not Zone 1 ag land that had to be taken off the list. Conservation land had to be taken off the list. But we're looking at the potential for where the renewable space is, in addition to rooftop solar space. So looking at it kind of all in totality, but also there are much more steps we need to take with respect to other technologies. This is just an early first snapshot looking at wind and solar, because that trend tends to be the lower cost sources of renewable energy currently. And our hope is that other technologies will get more information and costs will come down over time. So again, this is just really the start and initial analysis that's being done, but we wanted to share that with you all and to get your input so that you can see the same things that developers and others are looking at when they're looking to build renewable energy projects on, so we can all be at the same level playing field. And we also want to give the community an opportunity to comment up front on what's already existing in the North Shore region, and as well as other parts of the island. Where are there opportunities where the community sees there are opportunities for renewables or certain technologies, and also the comments about, where maybe less preferred options. And we want to document all of that in a report. And so rather than developers coming in blindly to community, we can share that information from the community and make that publicly available so that people aren't surprised when they're looking to build projects in different regions. So this is an opportunity for doing that, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Kurt. And before I get started, just wanted to maybe quickly address Bob's question about trying to visualize what a microgrid would look like. So for example, in some areas you could have a fire station, a hospital, and a shelter, emergency shelter within like a half-mile radius of each other. I think that would be kind of like a a good case to put a microgrid there, because in an emergency, you would want all of those facilities to be powered. So there are some areas on the island where that is the case, and those are kind of like, I wouldn't, quote unquote, obvious things that we should take a hard look at. So that's sort of what we're talking about. And then real quickly on the thing about funding, we are, I think Representative Peruso and Bobby had the question about funding. We are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, so when things get funded through electric rates, we usually need to demonstrate that it's in the public interest. So, certain microgrids may meet that standard. Otherwise, you would need to fund it privately or through like government funds or grants or whatnot. So hopefully that helps clarify. Okay, as Kurt mentioned, we're shifting gears a little bit, but what I want to say up front is, the reason we're here is about climate change. So Hawaiian Electric has an action plan to combat climate change. So what we just talked about on the resilience and microgrids is more about adapting to climate change and how we can be more resilient if a storm were to come through here. As we know, climate change is, some of the science is showing that, we're seeing increasing amount of storms. You see it on the mainland and even here locally. What we want to talk about now is also what we're doing to try and mitigate climate change. So doing our part to reduce our carbon emissions in terms of our long-term planning. So our ultimate goal as a state as well as Hawaiian Electric is to have zero carbon emissions by 2045. So we've got a long way to go, but it's only 20 years away. So what we're doing now is trying to come up with long-term plans on how to get there. So there's a lot of different factors that we consider when we look at our long-term plans, and it's sort of this big complex puzzle. And up here on the slide, you can see there's time. So as I mentioned, there's not much time to get there, and we have some interim goals that we'd like to meet in 2030 and 2040 as well. And then finally in 2045, we'd like to be at net zero carbon emissions. Affordability, as you all know, right now we're highly dependent on fossil fuel for a generation, and when the price of fossil fuel is high, like right now, it's a burden on the electric bills. So as we transition to more renewables, we can stabilize that price to be less volatile and kind of immune from the energy markets or the fossil fuel markets. Land use is a big one for us. So, the comment about ag land came up. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But, there's a lot of competing priorities. There's affordable housing, food sustainability, and energy, and they all need lots of land. So we're really cognizant about that, and I'll talk about how we're trying to address land use in our long-term planning. And then energy sources, we talk a lot about wind and solar, and that's mostly because those are the cheapest technologies right now, the most affordable technologies that are low carbon or renewable technologies. There may be other technologies in the future that become available, like hydrogen and whatnot, but our focus currently is on solar and wind. And then finally, community impact. So, we're extremely grateful that you folks are spending your evening with us. It's really important for us to get community feedback as we look to implement our long-term plans and our climate change action plan. There's Kurt mentioned at the top of the meeting that, in some of our recent solicitations for renewable projects, we worked with the West Oahu community to incorporate more community benefits into the procurement process. And then finally, reliability and resilience. We got to keep the lights on. We got to be more resilient, and that's always our number one priority. So this is slide up here is just showing what our current progress is like. So right now we have what we call as available. So that's like sun and wind power that's dependent on the weather, so we can take that energy when it's available. So we have quite a bit of that, but most of it is due to rooftop solar. And then in progress, we're renewable in development. We have a bunch of projects in the pipeline, and those are those were recently procured large-scale, grid-scale projects, solar and energy storage. So those projects are really good because we're able to store the solar energy during the day and use it at night when the load is the highest, when a lot of customers, residents come home and they start cooking, taking a shower, turning on the lights. And then firm capacity, we rely on the firm capacity when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. So that's an important part of keeping the lights on. So I want to show this map first. We did a study with NREL, and Katie helped with this. This is a map showing if we were to cover every rooftop on the island with solar. So a lot of the questions we often get is, can we get to 100% renewable energy with just rooftop? The answer is we need both. So we want to show this to show, we're not forgetting about rooftop. There is a lot of potential out there. Of course, depending on where you're located, some areas are sunnier than others. If you're in Nu'uanu, it might be cloudier, or the sun is blocked by the mountains. Or in downtown Honolulu, there's high rises that may be blocking. So depending where you're on the island, you'll get more or less sun. But we did want to show that rooftop solar is an important part of our long-term plans. And then when we look at grid scale, this map is showing green shaded areas is where we've been able to identify through data where there is solar or wind potential. So the way we arrived at the green shaded areas is we first excluded things like tsunami zones, flood zones. We also looked at agricultural lands, so all of the important agricultural lands are excluded. The Class A soil, ag land is excluded, as well as 90% of BNC land.
See?
I think it's the state rates zones certain lands based on the soil, the quality of the soil. So the higher quality soil obviously is best for farming. So you actually can't develop renewable projects on Class A land. B and C, there's a number of hurdles you need to go through in order to develop a project. So we've excluded all of that. And then, solar developers love flat land because it's easier to construct on, and the solar farm will be more efficient. So we've looked at land slopes up to 30%. Currently, most developers will tell you that the easiest to build on is like up to 10%. But we know we need more potential to get to 100%, so we are looking at steeper slopes. So what's left in the green is after we exclude all that land, that's what you get. And as you folks know, in this Moku, there is a lot of flat land. So that's why you do see a lot of green shaded area. So going back to, so this is just a technical study. It's very data driven. And so that's why we're here to get community feedback on, what we really want to know is where are places that are potential opportunities to site future renewable projects, and what are like parcels of land or sections of land where we should be more cautious because there's cultural sensitivities or environmental conservation type of sensitivities. So, we do have a website, hawaiipar.com/oahu, where we invite the public to go, and you're able to, on this map, you're able to place a pin on a particular parcel or area, and you can leave us a comment, and it can be a comment where there's an opportunity. Basically, we want to know why you put a pin there. Is it because we should avoid this area because it's going to be very difficult to get community support there, or it's an area where there may be more acceptance and it's a good opportunity to potentially site more solar or wind. So we do have this website, and we are looking for feedback as we create our long-term plans. And part of the reason we're doing this exercise is because we also need to plan the infrastructure that will support these large-scale projects. And I think, who's it? Kurt?
Thank you, Mark. And so just going back again, this is a tough conversation, and again, we're not expecting to solve all of this tonight. We want community members and those at home to think about this and to look closely at the information that's available. HawaiiPowered.com/Oahu is where you can just go to straight to that map that Mark mentioned, where you can, and again, this is just part of an effort to make it easier for communities to make their voices heard with respect to what's this analysis and just renewable energy siting in general. You know, we're looking to capture and document all of those different concepts and to hear from community. We're going to be showing the Menti again just to spark conversation, but we're going to be welcoming questions and comments in person, online, and all the different channels. And so question for just to kind of start us off, you know, what are important factors to consider with the siting of renewable energy generation? Kathleen mentioned one initially starting off, energy equity is a big one, right? In terms of the placement of projects and carrying the burden, and you know, there are new procedures in place and requirements that was mentioned earlier now, where there is going to be requirements for community benefits going forward. So if a project were to be constructed in a particular area or region, developers are going to be required to dedicate and to contribute $3,000 per megawatt per the size of the project, and to work with the community to design these community benefits packages to address needs that the community identifies. And so that's a start in terms of us trying to figure out ways where we can work more closely with communities to address energy equity on the island of Oahu and in all the service territories we serve. But really starting the conversation early with all of you here tonight, you know, in terms of any questions you have about this analysis, comments for us, questions, feedback, and again, all of this will be documented and be made available to you as well as to developers and people who are interested in constructing projects.
Thank you. So just one note going forward, we have essentially 15 minutes. So again, this is just the start of the conversation. When it comes to the point of an actual project being considered, we'll be out, you know, back in your folks' communities. Bob, you had a question?
I do. Hopefully the contracts that you make, the RFPs, have some legal language that forces the people that are doing the work to be compliant so that the community doesn't have to hire lawyers and sue these guys and get into a whole bunch of messy stuff. You guys are right in the middle of that, and you got a lot of high-paid lawyers. Can't you button it up so it doesn't fall back on the community to straighten things out? I know that's a little snarky, but that is a community concern.
Thank you, Bob. Hawaiian Electric, you want to?
Absolutely, Bob, and there is stronger language we're building into the RFPs and to hold account, to make developers more accountable. We're going to require that the commitments and the community needs and even the dialogue to identify those needs be documented, and those documents will be made public to the community. We're going to require them to post them on project websites. We're going to make it available, and that's going to be the document that we hold the developers accountable. They have to comply with those commitments over the course of however the duration long the contract is to sell power.
Thank you, Kurt. Next question. Let me know, yeah. Okay.
Oh my God, you guys are going to be so sick of me.
Go for it.
I never get a chance to do this. So, solar on rooftops, our neighborhood board meetings, that comes up a lot from our community and board members, you know, really maxing out the solar in our community. Right now, our community per HECO is maxed out, and that's partly because your system can't handle anymore, apparently, is what we're told. So that's something for you guys to consider. If you want to do these things, you're going to have to look at what you have out here anyway and make that more resilient and able to take it. If you're looking at wind,
do you want them to respond to that one?
no,
or you want
no
to
need. These
okay.
are just comments.
All right, thanks.
Wind, I'm going to be snarky, Bob, too. I think East Honolulu is a good spot for the next windmills. Sorry, but that's how I feel. And then I really do think grants to help the individual. I know there's programs out there, but you know, we do have people in our community that want solar, but you know, things are expensive right now. And any help that you guys, again, can connect for things like grants or very low-cost, good solar would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
If I may,
Go
Alani,
ahead.
real quick, and I'm sorry, everyone, that this is a little off topic, but I also wanted to mention a program, a collaboration with Hawaii Energy and Hawaii government, HGIA, the Hawaii Green Infrastructure Association. We're working with them as supportive partners to offer rooftop solar to bring down the costs. So this is something called Solarize, and it's starting out in the Kahuku and Ko'olauloa region, but going to be offered to North Shore as well, and also to West Oahu and Waianae, the communities that are carrying the burden. And so the intent of that program is for the community to put out its own request for proposals to bring a developer or installer to come out and reduce the cost per household, because if there can be a hui of community members that say, hey, we all want rooftop solar, then that makes it easier for the developer to build or construct those or install those projects, and they can offer a lower rate. The green, the GEMS funding that exists, that can be made more accessible for people who qualify. So, and also Hawaii Energy is a big part of it, because they're going to help homeowners bring their consumption down before they install rooftops. So it's a combination of different things. On our side, as Ken mentioned, the different programs we have, we want to help customers identify what the right fit is. But thank you for raising that, Kathleen, because you're absolutely right. We need to, in addition to all of this, increase the opportunities for rooftop solar.
Thank you, Kurt. A couple.
And thank you, Colton. And real quick, I'm sorry to eat up more time, but we also have what's known as shared solar or community-based renewable energy. And that's another one that we got a lot of good input from communities to improve that process, where if a project through this community-based renewable energy or shared solar request for proposal, let's say it were to be constructed in the Wailua Moku, the community who lives closest to the project will have first dibs on subscribing to that project, so that they would directly benefit from it. And so it's essentially a program where it's like rooftop solar, but you don't need a rooftop. If you're a renter, you could subscribe to it and get the same benefits, and it'll follow you where you reside as long as you're a customer. And so there's these different options out there, and we'll be happy to share more information as these become online. But right now, it's still in the request for proposals, the procurement process. But we're going to be back again when we're closer to those projects coming to fruition.
Thank you, Kurt. One quick one. I wanted to note on the Menti, the No More Wind on North Shore, because Kathleen has, we've met, for people online and watching Olelo, we meaning Hawaiian Electric and me facilitating for them, we've met with them, this community before, several years ago, on some really hard issues about how process gets done with respect to community. The reason I wanted to bring this up is, if we can go to the slide that shows where we can do the mapping. So before the meeting started, Kathleen reminded us that it's her feeling, and others that's in her community, no offshore wind on the North Shore. And so knowing that was the case, Kathleen, I wanted to make sure that if you go here, you can actually but you can put them in the ocean. So we made sure that you could actually put pins in the ocean. But that's what this is for, to capture this meeting and this process, to capture public sentiment like that. So we encourage you folks, it doesn't have to happen here and now, but if you get it onto that website, and please put your reasoning, whatever it is, whether it's for or against, please let us know that. That's how we're going to build a good system that doesn't pit community against each other. I'm going to take it to the back. Alex has a question.
Thank you. So microgrids do seem fairly complex, like there's a lot of engineering that goes into this. It might be helpful to just take into consideration some of the legacy engineering that exists on the North Shore. So very specifically, this may sound crazy, but I'm thinking of hydropower, the network of reservoirs and canals and channels that come down from the Wahiawa Reservoir. As Kathleen and others know, Dole is in the process of unloading that, but that water supply is critical to the ag community on the North Shore. If there are federal funds and other partners, and if this were integrated into like a micro hydro, some sort of super complex system, right? You're pumping water back uphill at night. it rains, the solar's not generating, but the hydro is like blasting with new power. Like some sort of creative solution with integrating hydro and the water resources we have that are essential to the ag community, and leveraging that both for energy generation and also for food sustainability would be excellent to see.
Excellent comment. Does anybody from Hawaiian Electric want to comment on that? It stands alone, but just to,
Yeah, that's a good point. And we are looking at other technologies than solar and wind. And so when we do our RFPs, our procurements, requests for proposals, we do structure them in a way where other technologies that developers can propose into those solicitations.
thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm checking to Kanani. We got one question. Okay. Is that to be read or there? Okay.
This is from Amy. I've heard that offshore wind is already being planned off Kaena Point. Is that just a rumor? Can't see any offshore on that online map.
Thank you. Who from Hawaiian Electric would like to take that question?
Okay. So in the past, there have been several developers who had an interest in developing offshore wind projects come and talk to us. But I can say that there are no proposals before us right now. There are no projects that we're just discussing. But those developers may be out there looking, right, and talking to folks. I know at least of one developer that has had some discussions with several neighborhood boards about exploring the idea of developing offshore wind off of their communities. But my understanding is that's not off of the west side, not off of Kaena.
Thank you. Well, to be clear, to translate again what he said is that there's nothing on the table now, but that doesn't preclude a developer actually coming to you and so that's where community involvement and this engagement is super important, to let your voices be known about what you think about those kind of situations. Any more on there? Any other questions from the audience or feedback?
Just a quickie. I had an idea. You guys said that the solar guys like flat land, and of course that's frequently ag land, so that's a conflict. But that you said that they were thinking about 30 degrees would be maybe doable. And it seems to me when you talked about cost efficiency, the closer to the power, the major overhead lines, that saves money on transmission lines. But what if there was a solar panels that could be suspended on cables that were suspended underneath the 46 kVA lines? Then you wouldn't have to worry about the topography, and you'd have the proximity part solved too.
Would anybody, thank you. Anybody Hawaiian Electric?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good idea. I'm not a structural engineer, but we're certainly open to that if a developer can kind of make that work. It'd probably take a lot of engineering to do that, to kind of suspend it. There's probably actually some guidelines on, what we can be hanging on our poles and stuff like that.
Thank you. Thank you for that idea, though. Really appreciate it. We're coming close to closing time. Is there any last comment or question that you folks? Thank you.
So in your deliberations and looking at all the different things that's happening in the area, do you folks keep up with the developments as far as the proposals that have been made in certain areas as far as having like housing developments and stuff like that?
Can you restate that, please?
Because there's one plan to put in affordable rental housings right here in Wailua. Yeah, and they're talking, I can't remember the exact number, but I think they were talking about 300 homes. And, if it's going to be a rental kind of agreement, I'm sure that, some kind of discussion with these developers who are actual real developers, have an idea of what you guys are doing so that they can kind of like incorporate it and make sure that, they're part of the system instead of being the part of we got to add on to the system now. you know? So doing it prior to their development would be a good idea.
So just to say that question back and then put it to you folks, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is there is a potential for a big low-income rental community to be built out here. And rather than just let it be built without any of these considerations about microgrids, about hardening the system, about all the things using rooftop solar and all of that, it would be best if they're talking, the developer with Hawaiian Electric, back and forth, having a dialogue to create the best possible scenario for energy use. Is that what you're... Prior to the development. Anybody from Hawaiian Electric want to take that?
I'll take a swing, Alani. A lot of it has to do with the landowner themselves, on what they want to use their land for. And so what we're doing here tonight is, even prior to having landowners come forward, letting community voice be captured and heard and making that visible prior to any agreements being in place with a landowner and any developer, whether it's a renewable developer, a housing developer, or agriculture. It's ultimately the landowner who would need to go through the permitting process, and that's where all of those issues in terms of usage go into play. There's a regulatory process for all of that, but this is even before any of that begins, because on our side too, we do put out on our in our procurement team what's known as a request for interest. And so we actually put a call out to landowners to say, hey, is anybody interested in having any type of renewable energy built on your land? And then they will then file something, say, hey, we're interested in having something. And so that's all part of that conversation with respect to land use. A lot of it is dependent on what landowners would be willing, what their preferences are. But this also gives an opportunity for communities to speak up front in terms of what their preferences are, what community needs and preferences are with respect to land use.
Thank you for that, Kurt. Did you? Sure, please.
I want to make sure I captured the part of Reed's comment around, or question around, development of housing, basically new electric loads, right? And that they're kind of, as much as possible, integrated into our plans. So we have a whole team of account managers and folks who work day in, day out in providing service to our customers. At worst, we get that connection when they make a request for electricity, but we really want to get that information and start working with them long before that. So we work with landowners, we work with developers, we work with the folks that develop these, the engineering firms and the planning organizations, really work with them to kind of educate them on our process, to kind of get us involved very much upfront as they're still trying to figure out what they want to do, so that they take into account the provision of electric service early. Yeah, so that's a really good comment.
Thank you, Colton. And I think we're just about out of time. So I'm going to thank you all for allowing me to help facilitate the conversation. Turn it back to you, Kurt.
Thank you, Alani. Thank all of you for joining us. Thanks for your time. We know you're all very busy, and thank you for coming out tonight to participate. This has been super helpful for us, again, as we are going out with this new information, helping us refine our communications and how we can make improvements going forward has been extremely useful for us. I just wanted to briefly mention these resources again. So again, all of the information that was shared here tonight is available on hawaiipower.com, and then some. There's more planning resource information that's on there. There's opportunities in what we've done here tonight, talking about microgrids through the ETIP website, through the renewable energy zones analysis. There are direct links that you can go in there and pin drops and add your comments. This is all part of our effort to try and make it easier to participate and capture your input and build it into the planning. But you can also contact us directly through that email, igp@hawaiianelectric.com, if you'd like to have follow-up discussions on this, because this is long-range planning, so it's continual. And we'll come back out, we'll engage, we'll share information. We have partners, again, specific to resilience in the Serene group. So we're just looking forward and really appreciative of all of your time, and we're really looking forward to working with all of you. Mahalo for all of you joining us in person and online and watching live on Olelo. This is all recorded. It's going to be available on our website again, if anybody. Absolutely, Kathy. We'll distribute the link for people to view at their convenience. And then, again, we're going to continue to receive your input in whatever means is easiest for all of you. So thank you all for your time. Mahalo for joining us. Have a great evening and drive home safely.